Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Boogie Board Tiki Bar. Today, I am delighted on a Friday to be joined by Keith Rabkin, who is the Chief Revenue Officer of PandaDoc. Keith, thank you so much for joining us today. How is the Friday in California?
Friday out here is great. Not the best weather. We're starting to really hit the fall, but Friday can't complain. Quarter's going well, and excited to be here.
Good, that's good stuff. I always like to kind of start with your origin story. I imagine that as a kid, you didn't yet have visions of growing up to be a chief revenue officer in tech. What was childhood Keith like from a career aspiration standpoint?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm the uh, son of two surgeons, so I always thought I would go into medicine. Had a love of science as a kid, but was steered away from medicine by my parents,
Hmm.
interestingly enough. And so went the business direction and really fell in love with the ability to have an impact on a company and the ability to work with people. I think that's something that's really important to me, and haven't looked back since.
And I saw before you got into the business world, you're at Stanford. It looks like you wrote for the newspaper and also maybe had a hand in the student section of the basketball team. That I'm pulling that from your LinkedIn, so I could be wrong. But
Yeah,
is there a story behind either of those?
I was like a super fanatic. I mean, back when I went to Stanford, we had a pretty good basketball team. They went to the Final Four one year, and we went to the Sweet 16. And I camped out all the time, which I know at some other schools that's very common, but it was not at Stanford until the couple of years we were there, and just absolutely loved it. Loved going to the basketball games, the like school camaraderie and team spirit, and had a lot of fun.
That's good stuff. Yeah, I went to the University of Wisconsin, and we were quite good when I was there too. And it's a how can you not get into that scene? I mean, it's
Yeah.
just good energy when you're a kid. But I was watching another interview that you did, and you started in banking, and then you went and left to get your MBA and work for Google. I saw you describe those two things as sort of inflection points for you. I was wondering if I could just ask you, what it was that made you want to pursue inflection, and if you kind of take us through that journey.
Yeah, so even as a kid, I had a real deep interest in technology. Again, I'm going to date myself, but I had a PC when I was like 8 years old, even before like the Apple II was popular, with the floppy drives, and would play around mostly games, to be honest. But just loved the idea of what could be unlocked with technology. And then you know, stayed close to technology, went to Stanford in the late 90s, and being in Silicon Valley around that time, you just saw the explosion of technology. Plus, being on a college campus, like we all had email, but we started seeing it everywhere. It was when Cisco was going through its heyday and Intel going through its heyday, and like the browser wars between Mozilla and Microsoft, super interesting. And I just fell in love with what technology enables and
Hmm.
what changes in our society. I think it's really interesting, particularly today when we have so much tension in the world, to keep in mind how much technology has actually benefited humanity. And I love being a part of that in a small way. So I'm just continually captivated by that. And that's what kind of led me down this path of, while I was in the financial services, I always wanted to stay close to technology there. So I did banking for tech companies. And
Hmm.
that got me thinking, how can I have an even bigger impact than just beyond what a financial team is doing? And that's what led me to Google. Trying to think about the world's greatest technology company, being a part of that, and helping shape the strategy there.
That makes sense, and something catches for you at Google because you start moving up the ladder, pretty quickly. It's an exciting time to be at Google. Is there a time that you remember where you just tell it catches? Like I'm good at this. This is going to be my career. Is there a moment?
I don't think there's a single moment. I mean, I think maybe my second job at Google, which was running the Gmail plus ops team, which was the first time I was formally managing people, like that I felt like I was decent at, understanding what motivated people, helping them solve problems, and really love working as like the
Hmm.
leader of a team. I felt like I was pretty good at that. And then I think others saw that, which did lead me down that path. And, today I can't imagine a job where I'm not leading teams. It's just important to what I like doing. And I think that goes back to even what I was saying at the beginning, just being around people is really important in my career.
Did you have a specific approach that you took either in that first job at Google, or maybe you learned along the way that led you to evolve as a leader? It sounds like you took to it pretty quickly, which is good. I think some people are somewhat shocked by the dichotomy of the expectation and role in IC versus leadership.
I think transparency is a big part of it. Being led the way I would want to be led is part of it. I would say my leadership has evolved. I'm probably more demanding now, but I think in being demanding, it's about transparency. Like, why are we doing these things? We're doing them in service of three things. One, the business outcome that we're trying to achieve for the business. Two, trying to do something for our customers, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer. Ultimately, that's why you do your work. It is the purpose of the business. And then three, I want the most for my team. I want them to reach their potential. And so I think that doesn't always land, but where people realize that and understand it, they raise to the bar, and that becomes really powerful as a leader.
Yeah, that makes sense. Demanding through the lens of kind of clear accountability, I think is a smart framing. And so, continuing on your journey, you go through different business units within Google, and really different businesses like YouTube, Fiber, and then you're actually at Johnson and Johnson, Adobe, now as the CRO of PandaDoc. I'm curious, you mentioned your love for technology, but these are pretty different types of businesses, types of industries. How were you able to kind of manage all that change?
I think fundamentally it comes down to solving problems. And when I talk to people about my role as a CRO at PandaDoc, as you rightly point out, like, I didn't grow up in sales. There's a lot of CROs who, if you look at their background, they've done 15, 20 years of sales. That's not me. But what did I learn at Google? I learned that data is one of the most important assets a company has, and that everything is a problem that can be broken down into pieces. So in every one of these jobs, I bring that approach, which is, let me look at the data, let me structure the process or the problem and break it down into pieces. So whatever my problem is, pipeline generation, for instance, I'm not going to just say, like, how do I grow pipeline? I'm going to look at all the pieces that make up pipeline. There's inbound, outbound, partnerships. Each of those I'm going to decompose. Inbound, I'm going to look at, like, what are the different channels? Is it an issue of leads? Is it an issue of conversion, right? There's always number, conversion. And I think when you start to break problems down like that, the subject matter expertise matters less than the approach you're bringing. And I think one thing that I also like to take pride in is hiring good people to help me with this. So I'm not the only one who is solving these problems at each one of these roles. At Google, I had some of the best people I've ever worked with on my team, and I tried to hire more of them. At J&J, I was lucky enough to have people from Google follow me. Here at PandaDoc, have built a really amazing team. Getting people in that context of, like, breaking the problem down and then letting them loose on it feels like it leads to good results for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I want to get into, there's like this angle where you are a potential PandaDoc customer, right? Like, so you got to resonate really well with your own customer base. But I'm curious, just even kind of before that, how you think about the use of technology in your business to solve your own problems. There's always something new coming out in the office of the CRO. It's hard to keep updated on what's going on and keep the lights on at the same time. How do you think about enabling your own business with tech?
Well, we start with our own product first, not to get too salesy, but ultimately, if you're not using your own product internally, you've got a problem. So you've got to be customer zero. You've got to continue to use that to drive the end results that you expect for your customers. One, so you can tell the story effectively, but two, so you can help make the product better. Part of my job is not just bringing in a revenue number. It's making the product better for the long run. And I want my customers to be happy with the product. I'm not here to sell something just to make the dollar. Like going back to what I said before about motivating my team, it's about doing the right thing for the business and the customer and the employee. And so I have to feel good about the product I sell. I wouldn't go to work at a place I didn't. So that's really important to me. And then beyond that, I go back to kind of the same framework that I use. I'm very big on frameworks, which is what are the problems that I have identified in my business? And if I can identify and isolate that problem, then I can go and find the technology that will help me solve it, right? So if I need to improve efficiency, right, maybe 3 years ago, we would improve efficiency differently than we do now, or we're looking to now with AI and generative AI. But start with the problem. Don't use the technology to have a solution in search of a problem. Then what are the possible solutions? How does technology play there?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you're thinking more about what are my business problems more practically, more fundamentally than how do I find AI solutions as an example, right? That's kind of the obvious undercurrent of
Absolutely.
what we're talking about here. Um, so, I want to talk specifically about PandaDoc because I think it's a really intriguing company. What interests you about coming there in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great product. We're the single solution for any company's document workflows or agreements. And I had an exposure to the space at Adobe with Document Cloud. I saw how people really suffer through broken workflows around their documents. How many times do you have to sign something where you have to download the file, then you've got to use one piece of software to sign it, then you save that file, then you've got to upload it back. I remember this scenario where I was doing that, and then you open the browser on your file directory and you're like searching for the right file.
Yeah.
Like, how many times have I downloaded a PDF and just had some random naming, and you're like, oh, it's such a headache. It's just so frustrating. And I think we hear that from our customers a lot, that there's this frustration around document workflow. I even read this stat that sellers spend 40% of their time just managing contracts and inputting data, not actually spending time with their customers or prospects. That, going back to like my love of solving problems, my love of putting the customer first, makes me cringe. So the idea that PandaDoc could have a solution that solves that, I think is great. The second thing is, I've worked at a lot of incumbents. I worked at Adobe. I worked at Google. I think incumbents often take their customers for granted. Not always. There's some incumbents that are very customer centric, but some do take their customers for granted. How can PandaDoc as a company, and I think PandaDoc really lives into this, support customers and be there for them and do what's right for their customers? So I love that about the values and have really seen that play out as I've been running the team here.
That makes a ton of sense. And you mentioned that your arc wasn't necessarily directly from sales, but in all your interviews and when we're talking today, you continually bring up customer centricity, and it's clear that's something that kind of drives you. I'm curious if that was something that you had to learn along the way, if it was innate, like how did you kind of develop that as a North Star?
It came pretty early at Google. I mean, I would definitely say I didn't have it before Google, but Google, one of its mantras was, follow the user. And I like customer better than user. I think it's a better term. But, I saw when you listen to customers, good things happen, right? I mean, just even going back to Gmail, when, before Gmail, every email system had like this really firm limit on file size or amount of
Yeah.
storage you could have. And then Gmail suddenly is like a gigabyte of data, and everyone flocked to it. They made it super usable, easy. Same thing with Google search. When you do what the customer actually cares about, good business results happen because people want to use your product. So that just resonated with me, made sense to me as a buyer. I think as I've moved into the business world and I'm a buyer of business software, it's the same thing. I was having dinner last night with a few other executives, and we were talking through a big incumbent in the space who, is, I mean, they're not doing anything unethical, but maybe not creating a very customer centric environment. And we're all thinking about maybe we should be moving off the software to something else. And so I think sometimes those decisions work in the short term, but not the long term. And I want to build an enduring company that lasts for the long term and continues to grow. And to do that, I've got to be customer focused. And I did learn that at Google.
And so you mentioned kind of an enduring business. You talked earlier about team building. You start in your first leadership role, presumably hiring individual contributors. You're now managing multiple lines of managers. Can you talk about what you look for in team members, whether it be individual contributor level, whether it be management level, or if there are first principles that kind of hang throughout?
Yeah, there's there's a few. I wish I had narrowed it down into an acronym, but I don't have one yet. The first one is grit. I think there's a great book about grit. I truly believe in it. That mesh of tenacity and purpose allows people to accomplish things that others feel is impossible. And I think when you pair that with curiosity, you unlock something even more powerful, which is I start asking questions because I'm curious and I just fundamentally want to know why something is. And then if I run into blockers, my tenacity, grit allows me to get through those. Suddenly you see this like magical flywheel of people who continue to find the root cause and get to answers, which then brings back to business performance. And they just find a way to solve things. And once they solve one thing, they're on to the next one because they're curious. So those two are very important for me. Data, as I talked about, like when you break down problems, you have to be able to use data. It's not about gut instincts. Maybe I'll never be a UX designer because I don't have that art or instinct on things, but that data centricity is really important. And then collaboration is really fun, and a sense of purpose around customers is absolutely crucial. If you don't want to do it for customers, you're in it just to like crank screws for the next 3 years. It's probably not the right fit for my team.
You mentioned that your the book about grit. You're going to executive dinners. You're developing these frameworks. You have a very busy job. How do you kind of keep up with new things? Are you listening to specific podcasts, or you have favorite books? You have a perfect routine that allows you to kind of keep your mental models going.
I think I'm lucky that I've got a great team that surfaces ideas to me. I've got a good network of friends and ex colleagues that share ideas, read a lot on LinkedIn, tech content, whether it's podcasts or blog. I guess you're not reading podcasts, but tech blogs, Substack letters, things like that with people that I think are particularly interesting.
And what's stoking your curiosity right now? Like, what are the, whether it's a trend, whether it's something in business, or just, I know you're into gardening. Is there just something that has your mind going in this moment that you're curious to see how it unfolds?
I mean, everyone is focused on AI, and I think it's really interesting. That's such a boring answer, though. So, what else? I think, the mesh around AI plus humans, like where is the intersection of allowing people to do more, and where will AI just go by itself? I think we still don't know that. But I think the other piece that's really interesting is there's a lot around Gen AI, but the other applications of AI. So there was the news, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, about Google solving like protein folding and being
Yeah.
able to predict proteins. That's really interesting. Or how do you apply AI on these like huge data sets, not to produce content, but just to crack the code, in other words. I think that's really interesting, and I think it's going to be really powerful within companies. And I don't think it's gotten as much press as Gen AI.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good answer, and I enjoy that you tend to look through these technological advancements through a hopeful lens. And I'm curious, the idea with this podcast is that there's probably a lot of people who see you and they think, okay, maybe I want that career. I'm interested in that trajectory. So if there's somebody that was just starting off, or maybe somebody who's on one of your teams, I'm curious what kind of blanket advice you would give them on beginning their journey.
I would say, align yourself with people that you believe in, that you trust, companies that you think are doing the right things. And there's certainly different people will align with different companies based on like their intrinsic values. But I think that's really important. I would always do what's right for the customer because I think it's going to produce growth. Um, and lastly, and probably the thing I tell everyone is create options for yourself. When I went and got my MBA, like the one lesson I took away was the value of options. And you think about it in a financial market, you literally can value an option, right? A call option, put option has value. It's true of other options in your life. When you have a choice, that choice provides you value. You may not know the value, be able to quantify it, but finding ways to give yourself options that open up new doors for you is really powerful. So even if you know where you want to be CRO. Again, my path wasn't straight here, but create options, whether it's a good company, whether it's an opportunity to take on more responsibility, those things will create options for you. Don't close doors for yourself, in other words.
I think that's a really good note to end on. I've never heard that before as a kind of a way of thinking about, just doing a good job, doing it for the right people as a way to, just open more opportunities. Like that's a pretty clear framework for thinking about it. So I think that's a good one to end on, Keith, because it's going to help the people that are listening, kind of just getting started and have heard what you said today and want to put it in practice. So I'm super grateful for your time, and yeah, we'll look forward to staying in touch here soon.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Kevin. Take care.